Good evening and welcome to Empty Cloud Monastery's online sutta studies. Here it is Wednesday evening for our regular discussion offered at the monastery. And you may be watching this live. I see some friends joining in already. I see Rick, Sean, and Ryan. So I hope you're all doing well, and anyone else who might be watching this live. And hello also to anyone who might be watching this after it's been recorded or joining on later. And tonight we are going to continue as usual looking at one of the Buddha's discourses, so one of the recordings of the Buddha's teachings, discussing the principles of Buddhism and how we can apply those to our daily life to find more peace and happiness, and also eventually so that we can apply that for liberation from the cycle of suffering. And so we will begin by rendering homage to the Buddha, and then we can go ahead and look at the sutta for today and discuss that as needed. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang saranang gacchami. And hello to all the other friends who are leaving in some comments on live. We have Manal, Mary, Maria, and Mike also leaving comments. Hope you're all doing well. And so I will go ahead and begin reading the sutta, and I would also invite you all to maybe close your eyes if you find it appropriate, or find a way to settle down and listen to the words as I'm reading them, because we will be reading a relatively straightforward sutta, relatively repetitive one. So it's helpful to absorb the information and listen with the best of your ability in a kind of calm way. You want to allow your mind to be calm and establish itself in clarity, so that the words of the sutta can be more impactful for you. So we can just take a few moments to settle down. And the sutta begins. At Savatthi, then a mendicant went up to the Buddha, bowed, sat down to one side, and said to him, "Sir, how does one know and see so as to give up ignorance and give rise to knowledge?" Mendicant, knowing and seeing the eye, sights, eye consciousness, and eye contact as impermanent, ignorance is given up and knowledge arises. And also knowing and seeing the pleasant, painful, or neutral feeling that arises conditioned by eye contact as impermanent, ignorance is given up and knowledge arises. Knowing and seeing the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, and knowing and seeing the mind, ideas, mind consciousness, and mind contact as impermanent, ignorance is given up and knowledge arises. And also knowing and seeing the pleasant, painful, or neutral feeling that arises conditioned by mind contact as impermanent, ignorance will be given up and knowledge will arise. That's how to know and see so as to give up ignorance and give rise to knowledge. And that's the end of our sutta for this evening. So we can pay respects with 3 sadhus before we discuss in further detail. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And so, are we, does everyone understand? Should we close for the night? Well, so we can go ahead and look at this in a little bit more detail in terms of how it can be applied and how it can be put into more direct practice. And so you can see, what is the question, right? What is the theme of this sutta? Well, there's a monastic, a bhikkhu, a monk, who is asking the Buddha actually a question which is very common in the suttas. So the Buddha has asked this question in many different times, and on many different occasions, he's asked, how does one give up ignorance and give rise to knowledge? He says, Kathannuko bhante janato katham passato avijjāpahīyati vidya upajjati. So he's saying, Kathannuko bhante janato. So how does one see? How does one know? And katham passato. How does one see? So that ignorance, avidya, is given up and knowledge, vidya, arises. Right? So in Buddhism, one of the ways of talking about the practice is talking about the removal of ignorance, right, and the establishing of knowledge. And if you know the Avijjāpahānasutta, which is the rolling forth the wheel of Dhamma, or turning the wheel of Dhamma, it's said to be the Buddha's first sermon, right? And this is where the Buddha taught the middle path between the extreme of indulgence in bodily pain and indulgence in bodily pleasure. And he taught the development of the mind by developing a pleasure of letting go. And then he taught the Four Noble Truths. And in there, then he goes on to explain how he himself had realized the Four Noble Truths. And he says that he had knowledge arise. He had wisdom and insight and clarity arise and so on. And so he's talking about how he had knowledge. And he says that the arising of knowledge in him was the determinant for his declaring that he had attained full awakening, right? So the word Buddha itself implies knowledge, right? Buddha means one who has become awake, one who has awoken. And so Buddha is one who is awake, one who has awoken. And so, for example, when you're dreaming or when you're sleeping and then you wake up, you might say that you're patibuddho, you've woken up, you're awake. So the Buddha is someone who is awake. And what does that mean, right? It means that he has knowledge, right? He has clarity, he has insight and wisdom into the nature of his experience. And so in order for us to become awakened, in order for us to have the same experience of insight that the Buddha had, we have to remove ignorance. We have to remove the obstructions to our knowledge, right? And so this monk is simply asking, how is it? What do we have to see and what do we have to know in order to abandon that ignorance? Because you might hear, okay, ignorance is the cause of suffering. Ignorance is the root of suffering. It's because we don't understand reality that we suffer. And then you might think, well, what exactly do we need to understand, right? Do we need to count all the atoms in the universe? Do we need to count all the grains of sand? Do we need to get a PhD in theoretical physics? Do we need to get a plumbing degree, right? And no, that's not the answer, right? So knowing and seeing in the Buddhist context doesn't actually mean knowing and seeing information in that way, right? It doesn't actually mean having a series of facts in your mind. So facts, information, skills, and worldly crafts, those things can be useful, right? They can be helpful, and we can even apply them to our Dhamma practice. But when we talk about ignorance in Buddhism, we're not talking about it in the normal way. When we say that maybe someone is ignorant, meaning that maybe they don't know much information, right? Or they don't have much of an education. So that's not what ignorance means in the Buddhist context. What ignorance means here, the Buddha then answers, right? He answers, what is it that you have to know and see? And he says, someone who knows and sees the eye, sights, eye consciousness, and eye contact as impermanent, ignorance will be given up and knowledge will arise. So, and then he goes through the other senses, right? Okay, so he's saying there's two main messages here. So one is that someone needs to see impermanence, probably word is anicca. The key is every single set the Buddha gives, it must be seen as impermanent. And then the other thing he's saying is he's describing, well, what needs to be seen as impermanent? And he's going into the details of sensory experience, right? The details of how our life unfolds itself in our experience, how it unfolds itself day to day, moment to moment. We're having sensory experiences, right? So for example, if you're watching this, you might be watching the video screen and you might be hearing my speaking, my voice, and you might be feeling your body sitting or in whatever posture that you're in. And you also might be smelling, maybe just the neutral sensation of the air, or maybe smelling another sensation if there's food cooking or things like that. And you might also be tasting, right? The neutral sensation on the tongue, or if you have a drink, you might be tasting the sensation of the drink. And you also have thoughts, right? You have mental experiences going on. So, for example, you are understanding the content of what I'm saying to a certain extent, right? You're understanding the words. So you're not just hearing sounds, but you're actually understanding meaning, and that's mental, right? That's on the mind. And you're understanding maybe things that are going on around you, what that means, and how you should be behaving, and so on. So that's all mental, right? Mental experiences, any reactions that you're having, and thoughts that you're having. And so, see, every moment, our sensory experience is unfolding. And the Buddha is saying that all the details of that, so the organs, our internal faculties, as well as the external things that we experience, and all the different things in between. So, right, the times when we have particular experiences and the sensations that we feel. So, all of it, everything there, the awareness, all of it, he's saying that has to be seen as impermanent. And that's what he says is the removal of ignorance. So then we might ask, well, what if you feel that maybe you feel like you've heard that, and maybe you feel you've heard that the I and so on are impermanent, but you might still have ignorance, right? Because even when the Buddha says that it must be known and seen, he doesn't mean heard. He doesn't mean that just the intellectual information, right? So that's a starting point. And in Buddhism, we talk about 3 levels of wisdom. So this is one of the teachings, which is not common in the suttas. It's found at least one place, I know, but it's common in later tradition to be used as a teaching device. And these 3 types in Pali are called Suttamaya Panya, which means wisdom gained from learning, from hearing. So wisdom that you get just from learning. That's Suttamaya Panya. And then you have Chintamaya Panya, and that's wisdom that's gained by reflection, wisdom that's gained by thinking. So after you've learned something, then you reflect on it in your own experience and so on. And then there's Bhavanamaya Panya, and that's wisdom gained by meditation, wisdom gained by cultivation. So that's when you actually cultivate and develop wisdom through more direct experience, we could say, right? Rather than reflecting on the level of thoughts and remembering, you start to look with the mind's eye, right? You start to look with your mind's eye at your experience, using that information and the reflections that you've gained, using that as kind of fuel in order to direct your mind. So it's less verbal, and it's more with a more calm and stable mind, and it's more focused. And so those are the 3 levels of wisdom, three ways of developing wisdom. And so this is, when we're talking about ignorance, we're really talking about something that has to be eradicated at the root. So it can't just be eradicated through the level of learning or reflection, but it has to be penetrated through meditation. It has to be penetrated through realization. But it begins with learning, right? So that's another thing, is that when we're talking about impermanence of our sense experience, we're talking about something that has to be seen very, very deeply. Even just seeing, you might think, well, I see, things are changing, but that's not enough, right? It can't just be like seeing a few things or parts of your experience is changing, but it has to be the whole lot. Like the whole lot of it has to be seen as changing. And it has to be seen as impermanent. So unreliable, unstable. So you begin by hearing this teaching, and you begin by developing faith in it, right? So some people, they do not have faith that these things are impermanent. So, for example, some people believe that maybe they have some kind of eternal essence to them, maybe some kind of eternal, true them. It's like what they really are, and that they won't lose it. And so, with those kinds of ideas, then you will see that other things are impermanent, but you'll still have a kind of ground, sort of something that you still don't want to let go of, something that you can't let go of because it's permanent. So it has to be applied to everything. Everything has to be seen in that way. Because if you are experiencing it with your mind or with any of your other senses, then it's impermanent. And if you're not experiencing it, then you wouldn't know about it, right? So if you're experiencing it, it must be impermanent. And if you're not experiencing it, then there's nothing to say, right? It's unconscious. There's no experience to even talk about. There's nothing to there's really no referent, right? So that's the kind of trap here, is that some people might fall into the idea of like, well, these things are impermanent and so on, but what about me? um, and we have to include ourselves in that. We are also impermanent, right? We too are impermanent, not just the other thing. So it's not just the leaves are impermanent and the trees are impermanent, but notice that here the Buddha is actually saying it's really every aspect that we experience. It's our life. It's our eyes and our ears and our nose, our tongue and our body and our mind. So the Buddha is really pointing to the personal level, right? Because while it is true that yes, trees and nature and buildings, these are impermanent, but those are not really what we need to meditate upon so much, right? Because we experience those things through our senses. And so it's kind of like you can imagine that you have many, many criminals sneaking into the city, right? And so all the criminals, they keep getting into the city and causing lots of trouble. And so you might think, okay, so we need to go and we need to catch each of the criminals one by one. And they keep coming. So there's many, many criminals, and it's very difficult to catch all of them. But if you just realize all of the criminals are actually coming through one gate. So if you just close the gate, none of them will be able to get in. You don't have to chase each one down, right? Or another example is, for example, ants, right? Ants getting into the monastery here. So sometimes we try to block it up. But if we try to sweep away all the ants individually, they just keep coming in. So it's only a temporary measure, right? It won't actually resolve the ant problem. So the only way to stop the ants is actually to block where they come in. And if you block where they come in, then many, many ants, even millions of ants, can't come in. So it's the same. So any of the things in the world that we tend to get attached to, well, they all have to come through the senses. They have to come through the doors of our senses. So if we just can understand the senses and the way that the senses function, then we will understand also all the other things. But if we try to go one by one, like, okay, first I need to meditate on the chairs are impermanent, and also the tables, and also the books, and also the bookshelf, and also the cushions, and also the chair legs, and also the windows, it's never going to happen, right? It's never going to work. I mean, it might work if you intuit that into your whole experience. But just going one by one like that isn't enough. So that's why the Buddha is saying that we have to see it in terms of our senses, right? We have to see it in terms of where it's all coming in. What is the root of it all? And so the root is our senses. And so then maybe we can talk a little bit about what are the senses, and then how we can look at this in our practice on a day-to-day level, and also when we're doing maybe more focused meditation practice when you find the time. So we can notice here the Buddha is breaking up into categories our experience. So just taking the example of the eye, which is the most common, he says there's eye, sights, eye consciousness, or you could call this, well, we'll stick with this now, and then I'll give you alternative translation so you can hear that. So we have eye, sights, eye consciousness, and eye contact, as well as the pleasant, painful, or neutral feeling that arises conditioned by eye contact. Okay, so what are the components? You have the internal sense, the external sense, the awareness, the contact, and the sensations. So pleasant, painful, or neutral sensations, the feeling tone. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 components, right? So each of the senses, the Buddha breaks it into 5 components, which are impermanent. Now, of course, we don't need to cling too much to the words and so on, but using this scheme can be very helpful, right? That's why the Buddha taught it. Otherwise, he wouldn't have taught it if it wasn't helpful. So we can use it as a kind of starting point, right? And then you can investigate in your own experience. But using this as a kind of guide can help a little bit in the beginning. So the 5 pieces here, the first 3 are the kind of the core ones, and then the other 2 are the results of that. So for example, your eye. Now what this is referring to is not just the flesh, not just the physical eyeball, but actually it refers also to, you could almost call it vision. It's your faculty of sight. So For example, in Pali, there's actually another word, akhi, which means the physical eyeball. But this word chakku, it means also the faculty of vision. So that's why, for example, in Pali, there's other words like sometimes the Buddha talks about the dibba chakku. That's someone who has vision which is divine, which can see divine things. So that's not a physical eyeball. Or he talks about the panya chakku. Some people have a wisdom eye. But if you say like they have the wisdom eye, you might think like, oh, they have a third eye or something, or they have another organ. But actually, they don't have another organ. It's just that their faculty of vision is extended. So chakku means like the faculty of vision. It's your whatever faculty that allows you to see. So it doesn't just mean the flesh, but it means your vision, So like, for example, a blind person, although they have physical eyeballs, perhaps, they might have physical eyes, but they don't have the faculty of vision. And so they won't experience sights, right? At least if they're fully blind. So it's the same with these other senses. So you don't need to necessarily contemplate the flesh of your body, right? You don't need to necessarily contemplate, how it is that the physical eye organ operates. That can be helpful if you'd like. You can contemplate, for example, how, the body is impermanent and how the organs of the body are in danger of being injured, and how they are in danger of losing their faculties, right? Like we can lose our sight, we can lose our hearing, we can lose our sense of taste and smell. Many people experience that with COVID, right? We can lose our sense of touch in parts of our body, especially, right? If we get parts amputated or they go numb. In meditation, sometimes our limbs go numb. And we can also lose our sense of mind. That's very hard to lose. But when sometimes it happens temporarily to an extent, for example, when you're sleeping or when you get knocked unconscious, or if someone is under anesthesia. And so all the different faculties, they can sometimes be lost. But notice that, for example, in order to lose your mind, which doesn't mean go crazy, but in order to lose your mind faculty, you don't necessarily need to have your brain or your heart or your mental, your physical organs removed. And the same with your eyes, right? So you can go blind while still having eyeballs and so on. So these are referring mostly to faculties, and those relate to the body. But you can kind of, it's a little bit more complicated than just the physical organ, because the physical organ alone isn't enough, right? So you can contemplate that as impermanent, right? If you just contemplate your own senses as impermanent. And this can be a really powerful practice, really powerful, because like I said, it's like the gateways to the city. So everything has to go through those. Everything has to go through those senses. So anything you experience, no matter how big, no matter how grand, no matter how magnificent, no matter how mystical, no matter how horrible, no matter how painful, it's all just a sensory experience. It's just a sensory experience. And it's conditioned. It's impermanent. It's conditioned. So maybe you see the most amazing, wonderful person, but the sight of them it's just a temporary sight. It's like a mirage. It's like a lightning flash. It just goes so quickly. It's just, that's all there is to it. There's very little there. It's just a temporary coming together of conditions, and you experience something and then it's gone, And we also, when we imagine something to be a particular way, it always ends up to be different. So for example, you see someone and you hear them and you experience them and you think like, oh, they're maybe a magnificent person, such a lovely, lovely person. But what's really happened, right, is you've had a series of sense experiences coming together, and you build a kind of solid concept out of that. But see, the actual experience is not solid or stable, but our mind builds a kind of stable concept. So although we experience many, many changes, right, the body is different. The voice, the ideas, the person's behavior, it all changes. But we build a concept in our mind of like a line that connects all the different changing experiences, right? It connects all the differences and it builds it into one thing. And it says like, well, this is one thing, even though it's actually many different things, but we make it into one thing, right? Even though we even experience it coarsely as we break it up like that. And so the point is, though, that are actually the experience in and of itself, the through line, that consistency, that idea, the concept of a singularity, even that is actually changing. Even that mental concept of stability is actually not stable, right? we experience it as stable, but you'll notice that actually, it changes, and also it is not reliable. It's liable to fading away, to ceasing. So that concept will have to go, eventually. So for example, if someone dies, well, then you'll lose that sense of continuity there. It'll be broken. And then you'll be very upset, right? If you had a lot of attachment, because what you clung to as very stable and reliable, you thought, something is changing and you related to it as reliable. But when it changed a radical way, it was always changing, but then it changes again, and it breaks your idea of what is consistent, right? So like, for example, maybe someone, all of a sudden they get very angry, but you thought that they were a very nice person. So then your consistent line, your concept of a nice person, kind of underneath all the changes, it suddenly gets interrupted and broken, right? Now something is different. And so now you're upset. And this is also true of ourselves, right? So maybe, for example, you think of yourself like, oh, maybe you are very good at sports, and then you get an injury and you can't practice sports anymore, right? At least for a time. So then you're very upset because you thought, oh, I am, like this. But actually you were never like that. That was just a concept that we build around it. So yes, the concepts are experienced. The concepts are real as such, right? They are real as sensory experiences. So they're not to be ignored, like they don't exist. Our concepts exist, and they're actually necessary to function, right? So for example, if I didn't have, if my mind didn't create concepts, then I wouldn't be able to use words. I wouldn't be able to even stand up, right? Even the idea of like a person walking across the room, well, we build a concept out of many, many different sensory experiences. We build the concept that there's one person moving, even though there's actually, an infinite number of ways that you could slice the picture. Another way that this is talked about is, for example, if you, look at my hand, right, you say, well, where does my hand begin and end, right? Where does my body begin and end? I say, well, it, begins and ends here. But it's also very arbitrary because actually there's, for example, heat emitting from my body. And there's also maybe perhaps skin that's coming off of my body. And so the way that we break it up, it's really conceptual, right? And this is more obvious with physical objects, right? So for example, you might see, this physical object, you might think that this is two things, right? This is a saucer with a cup on it. But someone else, they might think it's actually one thing. This is, for example, maybe it's a stupa, right? So that's one thing. So it depends on how your mind thinks about it. And then likewise this, we tend to see this, you might think, oh yeah, that's one thing, that's a bottle of water. And a bottle of water has parts, like a lid and a thing, but it's all one thing. But, it could just be conceived as actually two things, like it's a bottle and a lid. So the way that we conceive it, it's, it's conceptual. We do it based off what is convenient, right? We do it based off what makes sense to us. But it's actually not based in reality. It's just based in our conventions. It's based in what we find useful and practical. But reality is not telling us that we have to do it that way. You see, we could do it another way. And it would also be valid if it was practical, if it served our functions. One of the examples given of this is a joke. Well, it's kind of a joke. So 3 beings walk into a bar, right? A human, a hell being, and a deva. So a deva is like an angel. So a human, an angel, and a hell being walk into a bar. The human asks the bartender for a drink. They all ask for the bartender for a drink. The human gets the drink, they drink it, and it's water. The hell being gets it, and it's hot lava. The angel gets it, and it's divine nectar. But they all ask the bartender for a drink. So, who is right? Which one is the real drink that the bartender gave them? He actually served them the same thing. But see, their sensory experience is different. So, what is the real nature of the drink? What is the drink's real nature from its own side? Well, there isn't one, right? If it had a real nature, it would have to be independent from your experience, at which point you would no longer be talking about a drink, right? A drink is composed of experiences like liquid and temperature and so on. So those are experiences. So without experience, you're not actually talking about anything. So what that means then is that everything, it's filtered through our experience. It is our experience. And so there is no way that you can talk about something coherently as existing from its own side, right? As being independent. Most importantly, ourself, right? So we tend to think like, oh, ourself is this thing which is changing. We experience different changes on the surface. but there's like a core underneath which is consistently there. But that's not the case. Other people might tell us, oh, you have this habit. We didn't realize that we have that habit. It breaks our self-image. Or, we start changing and we realize, oh, we're actually different than we thought we were. And so there's a beautiful verse where the Buddha talks about this. And he says, Anattani attamaning passalokang sadevakang nivitang namarupasming idang satchanti manyati yena himanyanti tato tang hoti anyatha tanhitas samusa hoti mosadhaman hitara. So he says, Anattani attamaning, they conceive of a self in what is non-self. Passalokang sadevakang, look at this world with its angels. Nivitang namarupasming, habituated to mind and body, settled into and attached to mind and body. Idang sachanti manyati, they imagine that this is the truth. They imagine that this is reality. Yena himanyanti tato tang hoti anyatha. But in whatever way they imagine themselves to be, they will turn out to be different than that. Tato tang hoti anyatha. Tanhitassa musa hoti. That is the deceptive nature. That's the lie. That's the deceit of this. Mosa dhamman hitarang. For what is very momentary is of a deceptive nature. It's of a deceitful nature. Okay? So what does that mean? He's saying that whatever is impermanent, right? Right now we're talking about impermanence. Whatever is impermanent is mosa dhamman. It is of a deceptive nature. So you might know this from the precept musa vaḍḍha, right? Musa means false, means lie, means deceptive, wrong. So the Buddha is saying mosa dhamman means of a deceptive nature. It's like a lie. So, you see your experiences and it's like, oh yes, I'm very stable. I'm very consistent. But it's a it seems that way, but it's a lie. It's actually not. However you imagine it to be, it will turn out to be different than that. So he's saying, mosa dhammang hi ittarang. Ittarang means like it's very quickly changing. It's very short-lived. So whatever is very short-lived, it appears to be stable. We imagine that this is reality. It's really how we think it is. But actually, it turns out to be different than that. So it's like someone who promises us, oh, they give you an engagement ring and they seem to be very wealthy and very happy. But actually, it turns out that they are, get all their money from gambling. And actually, they are using credit cards the whole time. They had no money. They're actually in horrible debt, gambling and using credit cards. And actually, they're not happy. They are using drugs. So you thought that it was like this very, wealthy, happy, stable person that you're getting married to. But it turns out that actually all their money is gambled, credit card money, and their happiness is from drugs, temporary. Whenever you see them, they're on drugs. So you see, it's not how it looks because they're changing. So you see them for a time and it seems that they're one way, but actually they're always changing. And so, it actually turns out to be different. Now that's even a coarse example because even from, one moment to the next, it's already different than how we think it is. It's already different. And we could even go further, and even the present moment can't actually be pinned down, right? So we'll get into how this is relevant. So, for example, if you think, okay, we tend to think, yes, the past is not real, right? Because the past is gone, so it's impermanent, it's ceased. So the past is just a kind of idea, it's a memory, and so on. The future is just an idea, just a kind of memory, right? Or just a sort of imagination. But we think, oh, the present is real, the present is undeniable. But, is that really true? You start investigating it. So think about it. How long does the present last? How long of it is real? So you might think, okay, maybe about 1 second is real. Well, if it lasts for 1 second, that means it has a past and a future, right? 1 second takes, you can divide it into time, right? 1 second takes time to pass. It takes a whole second. So if the present lasts a whole second, that means that it has both a past, a present, and a future within it. So that means that it's not really the present. We're talking about a length of time. So in order for something to be the present, really be the present, not the past and the future, it has to have no duration in time. It has to not last any time. You can't break it up into more pieces, right? If you can break it up into more pieces of time, it would have a past and a future. Like 1 second has like half a second ago, and then, half a second later. So a second is not actually a present moment, right? So in order for it to be a present moment, in order for it to be actually quote unquote real, really experiencing it directly, it can't have any duration in time. Now you think about that. Wait a minute. If it has no duration and time, it's not actually a moment. If you add 0 1,000 times, you don't actually end up getting any time, right? So if you have a 0 duration moment, you add those up 1,000 times, you won't actually get a past and a future. So you won't actually get this idea of like a present moment succeeding itself. Usually we think like, oh, there's a present moment and then another present moment and then another present moment, and that adds up into like a line of time. But when you think about that, that doesn't make sense. Because a present moment, if it was really a moment, it would not have any duration. It would be 0 moments, 0 seconds. So 0 plus 0 plus 0 plus 0, you don't actually get any time, right? Do you understand what I'm saying? So the point is that even the present is actually a concept. You can't actually find a present moment when you analyze it because it's so unstable. And so even the present, we don't actually directly experience it. We just imagine it, it's conceptualized. It's built out of a kind of construct. We have a sense of duration of time and so on. So it's actually very fuzzy. Usually the present moment, you might actually be experiencing something for like a few seconds. You experience that as the present. So actually your mind is kind of building a construct out of a long series of what we conceive of as time. And so even time is, not how we think it is. And you can also see that, for example, when someone is very, very impatient, very, very restless, time seems to pass so slow. And when someone is having a really nice time, it seems to, time passes very, very quickly. And, that is actually documented science. That's actually how time works, even on a scientific level. So, someone who's traveling quicker, actually time goes at a different rate than someone who's traveling slower. That is, that's just how science, that's how gravity and so on works. So time is actually not an objective thing. Like you can't have a clock and it's the same amount of time passing for everybody. It doesn't work that way in reality, both from a scientific perspective and from a subjective perspective. Time is subjective, no matter what angle you look at it from. So even time, there even this idea of like a thing changing over time, even that is not how it seems to be. So things are very deceptive. They're very different from how we perceive them. We tend to relate to the world in a way which is really very, very, very different from what is actually going on. Right? What is actually going on is a series of sensory experiences which are, you can't pin them down. And we build concepts out of them. And even those concepts are sensory experiences. So this is, it can be reflected on from a very gross level, and that's not to diminish it. That's not to say it's wrong. You can contemplate, for example, your own death. That is very profound. It's not to say like, oh, that's less profound than the momentariness or whatever. So contemplating death, contemplating the decay of your faculties, contemplating the change and perishing and vanishing of sights and sounds and smells and tastes and touches, right? You might think of maybe you had a very nice meal recently. And you might think of how real it felt at that time to eat that meal, how real it felt. Or maybe you watched a movie or you had a really vivid conversation or you were listening to music and it felt very emotional, very real, very profound. And now think about it. It's gone. It's like a dream. It's just completely vanished. Like if you drew a line in water, it's just gone. There's no trace of it. There's no evidence for it. It's just completely vanished. So that is constantly happening. Our life is constantly like that. It's just vanishing beneath our fingertips, like trying to hold on to water. You can't hold on to it. So we're trying to hold on to things like, we really hold on to our body, we hold on to our mind, we hold on to who we are and who other people are, and we hold on to our possessions and our experiences, but they are very constantly changing, rapidly changing really at the rate that we crave. So the more restless you are, it will change quicker. When you're more calm, things will seem to change slower, but actually it's never stable. It's always from the lens of our experience. It's filtered through our senses, like my example of which I have not invented, it's a traditional example of the ghost, the hell being, the human, and the angel, right? They all experience the exact same thing differently. Another example of this is colors. You can see that very easily with colors. So, intuitively, we tend to think, for example, that, colors just exist in the world, like it is this color. And so myself, like I'm colorblind, for example. So some people, which doesn't mean I don't see colors, I just see them at a different spectrum than some people. So some people would tend to think like, oh, well, it's really this color, but you have a disability, so you see it wrong. You don't see the real color, which is actually there. But if you ask, for example, a dog, or you ask a bee, or you ask any other animal except a human, you ask a deva, you ask a ghost, they will experience a different color. So, it doesn't make sense to say only humans are right. Not even all humans, but only humans with this particular biology, which is, it's arbitrary. Who told us that is the right one? So there's no proof. There's no reason to think that just because a particular subset of humans with this particular biology, they're the ones who access real reality, everyone else is wrong. That doesn't make sense, right? Because they're experiencing it just as filtered through their senses as everybody else. It's not possible for a human to see certain colors of light, right? So, for example, some animals, they can see others more colors than humans can, right? So who is right? Is it the humans, or is it the animals who can see more nuanced light colors, right? You might be tempted to think, well, it's the people who can see the nuanced colors, right? So then it all breaks down, the construct that humans can see reality and other animals can't. So the point here, how this relates to impermanence, is that things which are impermanent, they're conditioned, right, by our senses. Our sense experience is how we access reality. Reality is our sense experience. And it's kind of shared, you could say, with all different beings. But when you try to find what is the real thing there, it's very unstable. It's very changing. It's very conditioned. Even when everyone is experiencing it at the same time, it's not the same. So, and like I said, this really, most importantly, it includes our life. It includes our existence, our self, our flow of experiences. So we can meditate on that by developing more awareness of this, not just blindly believing what we tend to think and believe, and not just going with our concepts of permanence and consistency and self, but rather we can start to see actually things are not as stable as I think. One of the meanings of anicca is not just impermanent or quote unquote changing, right? The word for changing that the Buddha uses is actually viparinama dhamma, means of the nature to change. So anicca can actually be taken in another sense as well. And for example, in the Vinaya, there is a word called a nicca bhatta. So a nicca bhatta is a meal which is nicca, a meal which is quote unquote permanent. But actually, it doesn't mean permanent like it's eternal. A nicca bhatta in the Vinaya means a regular meal. It means a meal that someone offers regularly. Like, for example, every Wednesday they offer this meal. So it's reliable, it's consistent. Like the meal is nicca, it means that it's steady or regular. So every single Wednesday they offer a meal. So what would happen if, for example, every single Wednesday your friend bought you a coffee for years, and then one day they didn't bring you any coffee on that day? You would be surprised, or you would be wondering what has happened. Because it was nicca, it was reliable, it was stable, it was consistent. Even if it wasn't, present every single moment of every single second, right? It wasn't like the coffee was eternal, but it was nicca in the sense that it was consistent, right? It was remaining, it was reliable. So when things are unreliable, for example, our bodies, right? You might think, well, my body seems to be relatively consistent, but it's actually anicca, because at any moment it could die, right? At any moment it could stop working. And so on with our thoughts, right? You might think, well, my thoughts are I tend to have these types of thoughts, but actually your thoughts might change. Maybe you get anxious thoughts or depressed thoughts. So moods and so on, they're not reliable, right? They're not nicca, they're anicca, unreliable, inconsistent, and irregular. And so you can reflect on these two aspects, of changing. So things being changing, not ever fixed or stable, not able to pin them down. Even moment to moment, you can't pin it down. And then the other aspect is not regular, not reliable. So at any moment, the sort of ground on which we stand, the wall that we lean against, our supports and what we rely on, all of that will fall away. It is not actually reliable. It's like you are standing on a floor, which you believe to be solid, but it turns out that actually it's about to shatter in a million pieces. And so just indulge me for a moment. Please imagine this in your mind. So imagine that you're standing in a room, and the room is very small. So there's 4 walls around you. There's no door. You are stuck in the room. The room is made of glass, and you can see beneath you is a pit of violent sharks, man-eating sharks. And you notice that the glass starts to crack. There's no escape, there's no door, and the glass is cracking. It's about to fall underneath your feet. So what do? And you think, oh, come on, Vaḍḍha, that's not realistic. Well, yes, it is, actually. Yes, it is realistic. That's what's happening every moment. That's how our body is, right? The Buddha actually says our body is like a jar that's going to crack up. And it, it could literally be man-eating sharks. So man-eating sharks are real, right? But it could also be cancer. It could be some other horrible illness. It could be, being kidnapped and violently assaulted. So there's many different horrible things that could happen. And in the best case scenario, you will lose everything, when you die. So this glass floor, so to speak, is real. That is our life. And you have no idea when it's going to crack. So you might think, well, I guess there's no escape then. Actually, the Buddha is saying there is an escape. It's the arising. You can have knowledge arise. Knowledge which lets go. So if you have knowledge that all of these things are impermanent, the problem is that we tend to think, oh, the glass is cracking, so I guess I just have to cling to whatever I can. I have to suck all the pleasure I can get out of it while it lasts, right? I'll just hope and wish, and if it doesn't, work out, I guess I'll just, next time. No, the Buddha is saying it's always cracking. Every life after life, constantly, moment after moment, even we don't have to wait for one life, even just moment after moment, the glass is cracking beneath us, and there is no escape. And so we tend to just cling on to whatever we can. Like we'll kind of walk into the corner of the room where the glass seems to be cracking the least. But that is not going to be safe. I think that we can all understand that, right? In this example, it's not safe. It just seems to be safer. So we might cling on to something which seems more permanent, or we might cling on to things which seem more reliable, but they are not reliable, right? They're not reliable. Even just like I said, a few moments, they can change radically. They are not there anymore. All you have is your memory left to cling on to. So we have to reflect, enough, enough of trying to find safety in this room. There is no safety. It's not safe. There is no way that it's going to work out. So what do? Well, you have to realize that you're not there in the first place. You're not in the room in the first place, right? So your eyes are there, ears are there, a body is there, a tongue is there, a mind is there, but where are you? Why are you? You don't have to be there, right? The senses are there. The experiences are there, but there is no you that needs to be there. They don't belong to you. The senses are part of nature. So you can imagine the exact same glass room, but there's no person in it. Would you be concerned? No, right? Because you don't take it personally. So for example, if the glass cracks and no one falls into the pit of sharks, you might think, oh, there's no one in there. But actually the glass is also part of nature, just like our bodies, just like our minds. So why do we take it personally? Like when our body falls into a pit of man-eating sharks, why do we think, oh, I am being eaten by the sharks. I'm going to fall. I am unsafe. I am unstable. But actually it's just the senses. It's just nature. It's not us. It's not me. It's not mine. It's not ours. Just like the glass, just like the sharks. So we tend to take these things personally, and we think that, oh, there's no escape because I have to be here. I'm stuck in this room. But actually, you're not stuck there. You're only stuck there because you believe that you are, because you hold on to the idea of being one of the senses or of owning the senses. So that is not necessary, right? It's actually, thank goodness it's not necessary, because that means that there's a way to escape. And the way to escape is not running out of the room. You don't need to do that. You don't need to actually change your external circumstance. You just need to let go of believing that these things are personal, right? So you do that by realizing they're impermanent. You do it by contemplating the glass room. So contemplating that all your sensory experiences, all your senses, all of the sensations, everything, all the awareness, all of it, all of the stuff, all of the experiences, the body, the mind, all of it, is like this glass floor. It is cracking, it's breaking, it's changing, it's inconsistent, it's unreliable, it's unstable, it's not to be depended upon. And when you do that again and again and again, what will happen is that you'll be pushed up against a wall. You'll start to experience, wow, there's no escape. And eventually you might be able to let go if you realize that you don't need to escape. You just need to let go. So it's like you need to just just allow yourself to be pushed against that wall. Like, allow yourself to be in the glass room. Don't hide. Don't close your eyes and pretend it's not happening. You have to reflect. No, this is really happening. Moment by moment, everything is falling apart. There's no stability. There's no reliable ground. It's all falling apart. It's all unstable. It's all incredibly perilous and dangerous. So you need to just accept that, right? We have to just accept that. We can't hide from it. And the closer we get to accepting it, it will be very, very fearful. But the closer that we get, actually, you can start to find safety, right? If you open up to the fact that it's totally fine if these things which are out of our control are out of our control. They never were in our control in the first place. So example, in the glass room example, right? Standing in the glass room above the sharks, how did you get in the room? You have no idea, right? You're just there. So now in samsara, how did you get here? You have no idea, right? You're just here, right? Maybe you remember like a few years after you were born. Some people remember even when they were in the womb. But most people, they don't remember much past that. They're just here. Ever since they remember, they've just been here. And ever since you've been here, it's been like this. It's never been different. It's never been otherwise. So, as far as we can ever see, we've just been in the glass room. There is no point where you can find like how you got there. So it's always been dangerous, both in the past and in the future and in the present. It will always be dangerous. It will always be perilous. There's no way that you can like, oh, there's a stairway that I got into the room that I can escape. There's no escape. There's no way out except for understanding that this situation, this circumstance is completely impersonal. It's just there. It's just an arisen thing. Like, it's just conditionally, circumstantially, under certain conditions, there is just the appearance of this room with the body and the mind in there. But it doesn't have to be taken as personal. It's just a conditional arising. It's just a dependent arising. It's just a circumstantial appearance. So we just have to contemplate that again and again, again and again. And this can be helpful by meditating, for example, on the 4 satipatthanas, so the 4 foundations of mindfulness. Now, of course, I should say that in order to contemplate this in daily life, it's good to just contemplate death, contemplate change, notice how things are changing and falling, how they're dangerous and perilous. So all the things I've been talking about, you can just reflect on that throughout your daily life. And by reflecting, I also mean just, meditating directly, like just observing it with mindfulness in the present moment, as you're going throughout your day. And allow the sense of fear and danger to really pervade your mind, right? Because if you start feeling like it's too much, then without a teacher, then it's okay to stop. But if you have a teacher, then it's okay to just keep going, because and consult with them to make sure that you're mentally stable enough. So I'm a little bit hesitant to recommend it just to everyone, but if you have a teacher that you can consult with, then you can just go ahead and just allow yourself to just embrace the fear, just embrace the anxiety. There's no other way out of that scenario. So it is perilous. It is in fact dangerous. It is terrifying. So we just have to embrace that. And the more we embrace it, the more we face it, the closer we can come to understanding it, right? To understanding this is impermanent. The problem is that we tend to see to a certain extent, like, oh, it's dangerous, it's impermanent, and then we look away. We ignore it. That is ignorance, right? It's a plain fact. It's manifest to all of us. If we just look, we are able to see that everything is changing, everything is unreliable and unsecure. It's not like reality is hiding itself. But it is deceptive, it is deceitful, because we look away from it. We ignore it. We trick ourselves. Like, I don't want to see that. I don't want to think about that. Or even more often, actually, than ignoring it directly, we ignore it by focusing on what we like. Like, okay, well, I like to, but in the future, I can go to college and I'm going to have a nice degree and I'm going to impress everyone and blah, 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 blah. Well, that is just ignoring the fact that, right now, everything is changing. So whatever your plans for the future are, right? Oh, you're going to get married and, sail off into the sunset. And that may be true, but right now it's changing, right? Right now it's unstable. You don't know that. So right now we tend to ignore, that's the ignorance. We tend to ignore the impermanence by focusing on a concept, like a future thing that seems stable to us. Like, oh, if I just get that thing, everything will be happy ever after. it'll be, once upon a time, and then it'll end with a happy smile and will fade off into a cheerful, bright kind of sparkle at the end. But it won't be like that. It's never going to be like that. It's always a wild goose chase. That's how the whole samsara is. We're always chasing our tail. So, we can just give up on that illusion, right? Just give it up, and we just focus in the present. It's unstable, and we just allow yourself to embrace that. Just embrace it. And so in the present, it can be contemplated. Now, then during meditation, I would recommend setting that aside for the time being and developing calm. Because when the mind is not stable, if the mind is not clear and calm, and if the hindrances are present, you won't be able to see reality. So now you might be able to start to see through reflection, why is it that the Buddha says the hindrances obstruct wisdom? Right? Because some people, they think, okay, well, the real practice is doing the vipassana, the clear seeing. The kind of calming practice is sort of just like a side trick. Like it's not really necessary. Well, that is not how the Buddha teaches. That's not what the Buddha says. He doesn't say that. So the Noble Eightfold Path has 8 factors, right? Not 7. So the 8th one, the Buddha calls samadhi. And he's referring to, he's saying that it's important to develop stability of mind, which is free of the 5 hindrances, with joy, with happiness, right? So why do we need to be content and happy and peaceful? And why do we have to remove the 5 hindrances? In order to, as it says here, know and see, right? Impermanence. Well, the word ignorance, I think, captures it very well, right? Because when we have desire, we ignore that things change. And we focus on what we want. Like, yes, it's impermanent, but I really want it. And it's going to make me happy. So you see, desire blocks it. Also anger, irritation, it blocks it. Like, yes, it's impermanent, but I hate it so much. Or like, oh, it's impermanent, but it's so painful. Just make it go away. Give me medicine so I can be happy. So we just ignore because we don't want to experience unpleasant things. We ignore that actually we can just, you don't, like the shark example, the pain, you don't need to take it personally. It's just a temporary, fleeting, illusory-like experience. It's completely impersonal. But because we have hatred, aversion, we cling to it as personal because we feel like we can get something pleasant if we just, hold on tight enough. And because we have desire, similarly, we think, oh, well, if I just hold on tight enough, eventually the impermanence will pass away and I'll get something reliable. So you see, when we have hindrances in our mind, when our mind is discontent, when it is not happy and peaceful and joyful, but it's searching for something else outside of what it has right now, it can't see clearly the present moment. Right? So we need to see clearly the present moment, but we can't do that if our mind is always looking to the future or the past. Okay, present moment, but I want to get that thing. Or when is the meditation over? So then you'll never see. You'll always be ignoring what's right in front of the eyes, right? What's right in front of the mind in order to get the thing that you want or get away what you don't like. So we have to develop a sense of well-being, a sense of contentment and peace in the present moment so that the mind can actually see what's going on, right? When we are happy and peaceful and content, we're present with what's happening. When we have desire or aversion, we're not present. We're always looking to the future or the past. So what that means is that we're looking to our concepts of stability and permanence and self. We're not looking at the fact that things are unstable, unreliable, dependent, and so on in the present. So the mind has to become clear and peaceful and content, and it has to remove desire and hatred, desire and aversion, pushing and pulling. And then the other things are sleepiness. So that should be rather obvious, right? If you're very sleepy, if you're very dull, you will not be able to see clearly, right? Because when we're very sleepy, we start ignoring what's happening and we start focusing on the feeling of tiredness and peace that we want to just doze off and ignore everything else. So our ignorance grows. So sleepiness has to be clarified. We have to make the mind bright, clear, still, and then restlessness. Restlessness is when the mind is like shaking, moving about, focusing on different things. So how can you see clearly if you're constantly ignoring it, right, by focusing on many different things? So restlessness has to be purified. Otherwise, the mind cannot see clearly. And finally, doubt. If the mind is doubting, again, it can't see clearly because it's not focusing on what it's experiencing. It's focusing on doubts about that. So like, for example, if you're supposed to be experiencing impermanence and you start thinking, well, how am I supposed to meditate on impermanence? What should I do? Well, then you're not actually meditating on impermanence. Or if you're thinking, oh, what, is this really the right path or should I follow Hinduism? Well, then you're not actually meditating on impermanence. So doubt obstructs the progress in meditation. So all 5 hindrances, they obstruct meditation progress. They obstruct vipassana, which means that samatha is what allows vipassana to occur, right? The mind has to become clear and calm. And that also means, though, the good news of that is that the opposite of those things is what allows vipassana to happen. So it's not just that you have to remove the hindrances, but when you remove desire, then you can become very content and happy. When you remove hatred, you become very gentle and loving, full of metta. When you remove sleepiness, you become very clear and bright and awake. When you remove restlessness, you become very peaceful and still and calm. And when you remove doubt, you become very confident, very secure, very stable. So that sounds pleasant, right? That sounds nice. Like, oh yes, I want that. I want to experience that. I don't want to experience the opposite of that. So you see, it's actually not a chore. Removing the hindrances, we should see it as a great opportunity. Even if you remove a little bit of the hindrances, you're getting closer to seeing impermanence. You're getting closer to not ignoring reality. So hindrance means ignoring reality. It means obstructing what's happening. So the hindrances, we should relate to them, we shouldn't relate to meditation as like a chore, like, oh, I need to, make my mind calm. I need to force my mind to force it on an object. We shouldn't relate to meditation like that. We should relate to meditation like, oh, I get to make my mind more peaceful, more calm, more loving, more still, more, etc. And I get to see clearly better, when I do that, if I do that. So see, it's a good news, right? It's good to meditate. It's not like a horrible chore. It becomes painful when we don't like it, when we fight the process, because when we focus on the hindrances, then of course they obstruct the progress. Like if we're like, well, I want it to be different. I want it to go quicker. I want it to be less painful. Well, then our desire gets in the way and our aversion gets in the way and our restlessness gets in the way. So when the hindrances get in the way, we don't like meditation. And then we don't see clearly. So we just focus on what we feel or what we've always focused on, i.e. our concepts of self, our concepts of pleasure, our concepts of beauty, and our concepts of permanence. So when we don't, when the hindrances are in the driver's seat, friends, we don't go to the amusement park. We go to the horrible place where the hindrances want to go. So we can't let the hindrances drive the mind. Don't be fooled by that. Like, oh, I don't like meditation. Well, the hindrances don't like meditation. You would love meditation, but the hindrances hate it. So it's like, maybe for example, children, sometimes the parents, right, they're talking with their friends and the parents want to have a conversation, but the children are like, can we go now? So the children hate the conversation, but the parents actually, they just want a moment of peace, right? They just want to enjoy it. So the hindrances, they hate meditation. They're like, can we go now? It's been 5 minutes. Isn't that enough? Haven't we calmed down enough now? 20 minutes. Isn't that good? I think it's time to go, enjoy something else. So the hindrances hate meditation. They always want to interrupt it. That's what they do. That's what hinder means. Hinder means obstruct, block. So we cannot trust them, right? They have not been our friends for a long, long, long time. So we have to instead trust that, no, the opposite of the hindrances are what we really want. We don't want these. And you can motivate yourself by what the Buddha is saying here. So the Buddha is saying, if you see this clearly, you'll have knowledge, right? Don't you want to know what's going on? Don't you want to experience reality? So that's good, right? So that motivates us. That motivates us to meditate. So don't think that meditation is a distraction from vipassana, blah, blah, blah. It's not a distraction. It is the opposite of that. Hindrances are a distraction. So, please don't think that. Now, then once we meditate, once you allow your mind to become more calm, both in daily life, but also when you're sitting down is when the hindrances are, more readily what we're working with. Then you can start to just allow your mind to open up to this. You don't even need to force it. Just hearing this, like I said, there's 3 types of wisdom, right? What you hear, what you reflect on, and then meditation. If you've been hearing this and you've been reflecting on it, then when you meditate, your mind will incline to it. You don't really need to force it. So you just need to just nudge your mind and it will see clearly enough, because it's like if you have a microscope pointed in the right direction, you don't need to force it. It will naturally see. If someone is looking towards a mountain, when the clouds clear away, they'll see the mountain. They don't need to do anything else, right? all that needs to happen is the clouds need to get out of the way, and they will see what's behind the clouds. So with our mind, we don't need to actually do anything really special. We just need to clear out the obstructions which are blocking reality. Reality is already happening. It's already happening, like I said. The hindrances just distract us. They make us ignore that. So we need to remove that ignorance, that ignoring, by clearing away those hindrances. And so, yeah, this is also true in daily life. But in daily life, reflection is actually going to be much more powerful, generally speaking, because when you're going through something, when you reflect on impermanence and you look at it even on a superficial level, it can be really impactful. It can be very helpful, you know. But because it's very difficult to have like a deep insight when you're working at McDonald's, it's just it's too much. So it's possible, but it's very difficult. And so reflection is actually very powerful. But when you're sitting down, then you have the opportunity to clarify and purify your mind even more. And that's the time when you can go deeper. But don't build such a dichotomy between it, of course. So I don't want to make that distinction too much. So when you're going throughout your day, it's also important to remove the hindrances, remove your desire, become more content. And it's actually amazing that when you start to practice just contentment in the present moment, like not following the pressure of desire, and just, don't be pressured by it, then don't be pulled by the pressure of it, I should say. Then you'll start to notice how the mind is it's always moving. It's like it's leaning towards the next thing. Especially when you're doing more meditation practice, you'll start to notice that if you pay attention to it. Like the mind, it's almost like the ability to sit still is, we tend to think it's easier when we find a relative sense of peace. But the more that you focus on it, you more realize like even a sense of peace is actually very restless. Like even just a daily sense of peace, it's very, very restless. The mind is still like always moving forward. It's always kind of grasping onto the next thing. It's clinging on and ignoring the fact that it's constantly ceasing. That's the thing, is that if the mind were to really fall into the present moment, it wouldn't be able to stand still. And this brings us back to what I was saying before, where the present moment actually doesn't have any duration to it, right? So we create a sense of time through our projection in the future, through our craving towards the future and the past. But as we allow our mind to settle more in the present, then actually the mind is not able to jump and move and grasp as much, like a monkey jumping branch to branch. So eventually the mind actually will start to cease more and more. Like the cessation of the mind will become more apparent to you, because the mind is constantly ceasing and grabbing onto the next thing. Every time the next thing rises up, it's actually a new mind, right? It's a separate mind, like a separate whole experience. The entire thing is different. So the more that you settle in the present, the more the mind's constant unreliability, instability comes. So as you focus, you kind of turn your attention inwards towards your senses and the constant changing of the sense experience and the dependency of that on your senses, especially your mind and so on, then it becomes less and less stable. But if you're very happy and content, if you don't have a lot of desire, then you can do that practice because you won't have anything blocking you. There's no reason that you couldn't do it. There's no desire that would pull you out of it. There's no hatred that would pull you away from it. There's no sleepiness that would make you fall off of it. There's no restlessness that would distract you from it. And there's no doubt that would obscure it. So the less hindrances you have, there's no reason that you can't look at your experience in that way. So just looking at it like that, just allowing yourself to settle in the present moment and just noticing like, wow, it's really constantly ceasing. Like every moment, it's really unstable. It's like a miniature death constantly. It's like death is like a constant thing, but just when our body dies, it's like a more drastic change. And so you can experience death just even right now without your body dying, just by observing your experience. It's constantly ceasing. And we just tend to grasp it immediately after that. Like, okay, that old me died, but I'm still here again. And it's the same actually when we get reborn. Just immediately we already think like, oh, I'm here again. It's me. It's changing again and again, but we still grasp it as me. So you don't need to die to let go of everything. It's actually constantly happening. Every single moment we're letting go of everything and grasping onto another whole set of things, metaphorically speaking. So just contemplating that with that present moment awareness, quote unquote, it's not going to be perfect, but just allowing your mind to notice that grasping tendency in the present noticing the sensory experience changing, noticing the dependency of it, noticing the instability of it, then that is, what the Buddha is talking about here. And eventually, when the conditions come together, you might be able to glimpse it, right? Eventually, when the conditions are there, like when the mind is focused enough, when the mind is intent enough, and when the mind is willing enough, we have to set aside our mundane focuses. And so maybe I'll close with that, is that this is not exclusive to monastics, right? It's also possible for lay people to see the impermanence of the senses and so on. But why is it, that monastic life is so valuable and lay life can be difficult? So how can you, use your lay life? Because most of you watching this will, of course, be lay people, right? So how can you use this, as lay people, right? So what makes it different, right? Well, one of the things, there's, obviously there's many different aspects to it, but one of the things is that if you're committed to lay life, that means you are committed, right, to this kind of clinging at the future, right? So it's not that monastics don't cling to the future, but it's just that when you take a monastic form, you're constantly reminded, like, you're not supposed to be clinging to the future. There's nothing for you in the future. All that's for us is a cremation pyre, being dead. That's all that we get when we die as monastics. We don't have anything else to get. So the reason that we're here, you eat, what people give you, which sometimes it can be anything, you don't have reliable much. And so as a monastic, you're just reminded, like, the only safety you have, it's like the glass room example. The only safety you have is to practice the Dhamma. Of course, there are ways to, avoid that. But as a monastic, that's what you're supposed to be doing. And that's what it's supposed to be supporting you do that, because it's very difficult to do that because of our tendencies. So as a lay person, you have to think, like, how is your life oriented? Not just the meditation practice, but your whole life. If your whole life is oriented towards getting things in the future, then the meditation practice will not proceed. So as a lay person, you can also change the attitude, right? Change the attitude to what matters is the Dhamma, right? You just have to remember that the lay values, like the value of being a householder, you have to set those aside in order to focus on this. This is more important for the time being, right? So when you can find the time, you have to reorient your life. So that's why it's an obstruction. So that's why it's difficult for lay people, because if your whole life is oriented towards ignoring the fact that everything has to go every single moment, none of it is yours, none of it belongs to you, none of it is stable. Well, if you realize that enough, you just might become a monastic, right? That's kind of the point, right? So that's why there's this barrier. It's not like lay people are different. It's just that you have to look at how you're orienting your life. If you're orienting your life towards, the opposite of this, then you will not be able to see it. And if you orient your life toward it fully, then you'll very naturally, you'll just want to renounce everything, because you realize, well, there's nothing there. There's nothing stable. It's not, you can't hold on to it. Even in the beginning, it never was yours to begin with. So, that doesn't mean you have to stop being a layperson, but what I'm saying is that I would really encourage you, like, reflect on what do you value most? If you want to see impermanence, if you want to talk, if you want to see what this is talking about, you have to evaluate your life decisions. And if you don't want to, that's okay. You can also still practice the Dhamma, but you're going to have to reorient. So there's that sense of spiritual urgency, which is necessary. Spiritual urgency, like, this is the most important thing. So in the example of the person in the room, which is falling beneath their feet, right? They can't think, like, well, at least maybe I can build a family in here in the meantime, right? Like, well, maybe I can, use the glass to build some furniture, and I can, enjoy myself a little bit, and maybe there's some nice refreshments. There's a little bar in the room that I can enjoy. No, like, you can't do that. You have to realize, like, you can't close your eyes and pretend that the room is not cracking, right? You have to just face it full on. Like, there is no reliability. So it's the same. So in a lay life, you have to, when you're focusing on, if you want to realize this, then you have to think, like, no, there's no safety. Like, I can't distract myself with, sensual pleasures. I can't distract myself with family or reputation or job or any, that doesn't, it's not valid here, because everything is unstable. Everything is unreliable. Nothing can be depended on. So when you shift your focus like that, then it doesn't matter if you're a layperson, it doesn't matter what clothes you're wearing. If your focus is like that, then you can see the Dhamma, even with the conditions are right, when you have the right conditions. If your focus is on something else, whether you're a monk or a layperson, it's not going to happen. So no matter what clothing you're wearing, what matters is the attitude. It's the renunciant attitude, willing to let go of everything, willing to say, even if this body falls into the pit of sharks, willing to be able to you have to be willing to see that it never was yours in the first place. Like this Buddhist simile of grass and twigs being carried off, right? He's saying it's not personal, just let it go. So, we take care of our body and so on, but when things happen to us against our will, when these things are shifting and change is against our will, we can't will it to not change. It is changing. Even the will to make it not change would be a changing thing. So we can't make it not change. And so we just have to reflect like, well, I am stuck here. There is no escape. So I have two options. One, ignore it and distract myself with the pleasures of the world and continue in the cycle of samsara. Two, focus on the fact that samsara is just this empty distraction, this empty illusion-like thing. It's not even, it seems so solid, but it's not. So you have those two options. One is very frightful, but it can lead you to a lot of peace. And the other one is very peaceful, but it will lead you to a lot of suffering and fear. So they seem the opposite of what it is. That's the deceptive, right? It seems like pursuing samsara is very safe and kind of letting go of everything is very dangerous and fearful, but actually they end up being the opposite way. So I would encourage you all to reflect on that attitude, to assess these values so that you can get the most out of this, get the most out of your practice so that you're, and in the meantime, you can always remove the hindrances to the best of your ability. You can always develop the other aspects of the path and build the conditions. And as you build those conditions, your mind might incline towards seeing this more and more, right? Naturally. Like the more you find peace, for example, in virtue, the more you find peace in generosity, the more you find peace in Dhamma and the peace in meditation, then the less your mind will be inclined to look outwards and the more your mind will be inclined to look at the Dhamma. And so even if you are not ready to make that radical jump in the way you're in the attitude, right, then even still the mind will be inclining that way and you might be able to to have the conditions ready there. So we just develop to the best of our ability and the best of our focus and energy and so on. So those are a few thoughts on impermanence and how we can apply that. So at this time we can close with 3 sadhus and then we'll look at the questions. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Okay. So we have questions from a few people. Manny says, are there any instructions on what to reflect and how to reflect? Chintamaya panya. Okay, so for wisdom from reflection, what should you reflect on? Well, I think I clarified that sufficiently. So, right, reflecting on impermanence and anything that you learn about, it's really referring to any Dhamma principle that you learn about, reflecting on it. So, in this case, I would recommend impermanence just because I spent over an hour talking about it. So, I would recommend using that. But if it's another topic that you're hearing about or learning about, then you can reflect on that. So anything. But yeah, in this case, I would really recommend the impermanence subject. Okay, and also hello from Janaki. Hello, Janaki. And Ronald. Ronald says, Namo Mitofo. Namo Mitofo, Ronald. And Richard says, personally, I find the sixth sense fields a very advanced topic because I think that one can't really know them until one has had an experience of a jhana. Am I right? Or apart from sense restraint, how can one really train or understand the 6 sense bases? Well, Richard, if you think that you can't know your sense bases until you have a jhana, I don't know how you're living your life, how you're watching this video or listening to this sound and typing in these questions. So it seems to me that you're able to know them very clearly and very thoroughly and consistently. We've actually been experiencing them since undiscoverable beginning. So you don't need to have any special experience to know them. Now, in order to see the nature of them very deeply, then, as I mentioned, the hindrances are, of course, an obstruction to that. But you don't need to sell yourself short. You can reflect on these right now, and you can begin that right now. And you also say, apart from sense restraint, how can one really train or understand the six sense bases? Well, you can start training in sense restraint now. You don't need to attain jhana to practice sense restraint. In fact, it's really the other way around, right? The Buddha says sense restraint is a practice that is a preliminary. So sense restraint can be practiced by everyone, lay people and monastics. It's not really a particularly difficult practice. Or I should say, it's not a particularly complicated practice or advanced practice. It's difficult because we have very strong tendencies towards desire and aversion, but it's not a particularly complicated one. Our senses will present us with pressure, and we just have to understand, like, this is not to be indulged in. This is not to be taken personally. This is to be taken as impersonal, as arisen circumstantially because of the senses and so on. Not because of, it's not me and mine, right? So like when we see nice things and bad things and hear and experience through our mind good and bad thoughts and so on, then we are to practice restraint, saying this is pressuring, this is my mind wants to go out for it, but reflect on it being impermanent, reflect on it being impersonal, reflect on it being not dangerous to reach out. So those can be done at any time, and as you do it, you will start to understand more. So if you find it advanced, you will find it more and more relatable as you practice with it. So don't worry about that, honestly. Just start practicing. And it might be difficult in the beginning. It is advanced because we're talking about, it's really unthinkable the amount of time that we've been ignoring this. Today we had a sutta discussion on Venerable Sariputta and Mahamoggallana's going forth and when they attained stream entry. And in there, if you watch the video, it says that they saw something which had been neglected for innumerable eons. So innumerable eons, we have for a long, long time, literally, as I said, since beginning with time without a discoverable beginning, we ignore this. And so now you have a chance to start looking at it, and it might be difficult, but you can do it. You can do it. Don't worry. Just step by step. And it begins with virtue. It begins with sila, because when you train in sila, then you have to watch your senses more closely. So, like, for example, you might be tempted to steal. When you observe sila, you have to see, oh, I'm experiencing this sensory thing which is exerting pressure on me to act out with desire. And so when you practice sila, not stealing, then you start restraining that, at least through your body. And you start to see the pressure in your senses, right? So when you practice sila, you're not necessarily restraining the senses, but you start to see how the senses pressure you to act unskillfully. So that's why the sila then leads to sense restraint, because you start to see how the senses are pressuring you and you act out of that. So then you stop acting out of it, and all you're left with is watching how the senses are pressuring you. So then the next step is to start, relieving the pressure, right? So as you practice sila, then the sense restraint should become easier. And as you practice sense restraint, then the meditation should become easier. Okay, and then Ryan asks, is this related to how the senses of beings dictates how they see their world reality? If so, what does real world, e.g. colors of the plants, the mountains, the sky, really look like? What does the real world look like? Okay. Let's see. Is this related to how the senses of beings dictate? Yeah, so this is what I touched on. Yeah, the senses of beings dictate, right, how we see the world. It is not subjective, nor is it objective. It's neither, because if it was entirely subjective, then you could just experience whatever you wanted, whenever you wanted, right? Or however you thought. It's not like that. So, like, even if you don't want it, you might experience something very painful. So it's not entirely subjective. But it's also not entirely objective, because pain is also, it's in the mind. It's not a objective thing, and it can never be experienced independently in and of itself. So it's neither subjective nor objective. It is indeterminate. It's really impossible to pin down. So what does it really look like? I would say, why would you even ask the question, right? It's irrelevant. So, for example, the Buddha said, he left undeclared, unanswered, is the cosmos eternal? Is it not eternal? Is it infinite, or is it finite? And it's not like he just did that because it was an irrelevant piece of trivia. It's not like there is an answer and it's just irrelevant. That's one component of it. It is irrelevant. So also here, right, what does it really look like? Well, that's not really relevant, right, to our practice. No matter how it looks, what matters is that, it's impermanent and we're suffering and so on. But apart from that, it's also it's not possible to find that out because the world is not something that you can just measure independently of your senses. A measurement happens with an instrument, whether it's your eyes or a microscope or a telescope or whatever. So measurements happen with instruments. You can't have like an instrumentless measurement. So it's not possible to experience what the world, quote unquote, really looks like, because that's just a concept based off your experiences. Okay, Richard says, a scallywag, a scallywag can make lots of bad karma in his present life, but in his next life, according to the Buddha, he could be reborn in heaven due to the ripening of his past life's good karma. And a person who is good in this life could be reborn in hell in his next life. Even this is not usual to answer why I arrive at the true. Okay, so you're saying this relates to anicca because whatever you think the future will be, it will be something completely different. To a certain extent, yeah, that's true, right? That's part of what I'm talking about, exactly, that our expectations can be disappointed at really any time. So if you think like, oh, you do a lot of good, you think, oh, you're definitely going to heaven. Well, you might be disappointed. You don't know that for sure, necessarily, right? So, and the same, with hell, you might think like, oh, they're definitely going to go to hell, but they might not. So, yes, it's related to that, but it's also more than that. It's not just like the future will be different, but it's that things are not how they seem even right now. That's what the Buddha is also saying. Right now it even seems like things are, it's personal. Like right now it seems like we are here, it seems like the most obvious thing in the world. That's what the Buddha that's what the Buddha says. He says, idang satchanti manyati. He says they believe it to be true. And there's the reason he says that verse, actually the prose, he says, what the world believes to be true, the noble ones know to be false. And what the world thinks to be false, the noble ones know to be true. Right? So it seems like it's the most true, it's the most obvious thing, it's the most almost indubitable thing that we are here. It's like you couldn't doubt anything but that. And that's famously, many people will know René Descartes, right? René Descartes. So he said, cogito ergo sum, right? So the context of that, because we don't have much time, but the context of it is that he was doubting everything. So René Descartes, because sometimes people take the quote out of context, he was doubting everything. He was saying, I can't know that anything I experience is real. I can't know, maybe everything I experience is a demon tricking me and putting visions in my mind. I don't know anything is real. But then he said, what is the one thing that is there anything that is undoubtable? He says, the one thing that's undoubtable is that I am, thinking, I'm doubting about these things. Like I am, here doubting about them. So at the very least, he says, cogito ergo sum. So at the very least, because I am aware, because I'm cogitating, because I am aware, well, therefore I exist. So that at least is true. And then from there, he then builds everything else. So the Buddhism, for him, the only thing that's true, at the very least, the very bare minimum that's true is that he exists. Well, from Buddhism's point of view, that's like, it's closer to the opposite of that, right? It's not exactly true that we don't exist in the way that, we might tend to imagine it, but it's like, it's not the way that it seems. So, yeah, it's a little bit more than just like, it might be different. The future might end up being uncertain, but that is definitely part of it. Okay, Julie says, there is still clinging to pleasurable food just because of the potential of some pleasure and the release of pressure when I don't give in. Most other pleasure has fallen away, but not sure how to let go even of the potential for the minimal pleasure because I haven't found something that outweighs that potential. Not even meditation, since it's not always pleasant or accessible. Vipassana knowing meditation. Yeah, that's a really great question, Julie. Thank you for sharing that and for mentioning it. It's not exactly. Oh, okay, it is a question. Yes. So, what I would say is, of course, one thing is, not to push yourself too much in the sense of, I wouldn't encourage you to stop pushing yourself, but don't necessarily expect that your craving for food is going to go away, immediately. It might take some time, because as you say, it's not easy when you feel like even just the potential is very subtle, right? Even the potential for pleasure we cling to. Like even just the idea of like, well, it's going to be good, or it will be good in the future. Like I'll get some relief. So even just the idea of like the potential of indulging in our senses exerts pressure on us. So at that point, you were talking about something very subtle, which is really good that you're noticing that and that you've got to that point. Because most people, they're not even close to that. they're at the level of like just pure. They don't even know that they're being pressured. They don't even think it's a problem, right? So the fact that you're noticing like even the potential is a pressure is really good. And so I would say, have patience with this practice and don't give in, don't stop because because you're doing really good stuff. You're doing good practice. So don't stop like, oh, it's not going to work. You're doing what you should be, and it is supposed to be difficult. However, I would recommend trying to develop more and more peace within that. So, for example, you mentioned doing noting meditation, and I would recommend trying to do some more stabilizing and calming meditation. So what that means is like you don't need to note so much, but just allow your mind to settle in the sense of peace, which can come from not indulging, right? So when you don't indulge and when you find peace in non-indulgence, like the safety of non-indulgence, you can find a lot of peace in that. And your mind doesn't need to move around. You don't need to note different things. You just focus on the sense of safety, the sense of non-remorse and so on, the sense of not being pulled and dragged around. And then you also know, right, that if you're not indulging in the pleasures, then the pains don't really bother you, right? When you experience the pain, it's not really a problem because you don't look forward to the pleasure. So you can find that sense of safety and peace and develop a sense of calm. And as you do that, your mind might be able to settle down in the present moment. You might be able to remove more and more hindrances. And as you naturally move those hindrances, you will find what you say, that pleasure, quote unquote, which outweighs it, because you will find more pleasure. Because the pleasure will come not from getting another experience, but from releasing that desire, releasing the pressure of the potential. So yeah, just keep practicing. But I would really encourage you to practice more calming meditation. And like I said, you don't have to do it in a forceful way. Just do it by finding the peace of removing those hindrances. And that will help a lot. Give you kind of some food for the journey. Okay, HBD says, how exactly is ignorance defined according to the Buddha? Well, HBD, I think we discussed that extensively. So I would recommend just checking the sutta and maybe re-listening to the talk if you found it didn't fully go it, but it's not seeing the impermanence, right? Not understanding the Four Noble Truths. So specifically, this one is talking about the First Noble Truth. Ignorance is not fully understanding dukkha. Dukkha, in this context, the Buddha is defining as the six senses and all their experiences. Okay. And then we have two more questions. Is the present moment awareness that Buddha is talking about in the sutta the same awareness as Zen Buddhism emphasizes? I mean, any Buddhism that's emphasizing present moment awareness it's probably basically much more or less the same type of thing. And then Bhante, you mentioned mindfulness as a sentry guarding what comes into our mind and through our senses. Powerful simile. I actually don't remember saying that. That's a simile of the Buddha, but I did talk about the senses as doors. Do you know off the top of your head what sutta this is on, please? Well, the mindfulness as the sentry is found in a couple suttas. One of them that comes to mind is the simile of the parrot tree. But if you just look up mindfulness sentry simile, then you can probably find a few examples of that. Yeah. Okay, everyone. So sadhu for listening and sadhu for your practice and your focus and your attention. I hope that you have a good night and a good practice. May you be well, happy, peaceful, and may the Buddha's teachings bring you lots of joy and liberation from suffering. So have a good night or a good day wherever you are.